Welcome to Our College, Your Voices. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. Over the last several weeks in the United States and around the world, we've seen protests, marches, and rallies related to the deaths of people like George Floyd, Ahmaud Arberry, Breonna Taylor, and Dreajson Reed. Race and racism are challenging topics to talk about, but we must talk about them, particularly in the context of how we collectively function as a college community. I'm joined today by three other members of the college community to have a dialogue about race and racism. It's a conversation that may not be comfortable at times, perhaps for us as we have the conversation, and perhaps for you as you listen. I ask only that we all sit in the discomfort and examine why it is uncomfortable for us and consider how we can use that discomfort to grow and move forward. If you typically turn off the episode as soon as I start the call to action, I urge you to stay today as we have a very important call to action if you want to engage further in this conversation. And now let's meet our guests. Chris Cathcart. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Would you tell us a little bit about what you do at the college and just a little bit about you?
Sure. I serve as the Vice Chancellor of Student Success in Fort Wayne. I've held that role for just about 8 years now. Shocking. In my free time, I do a lot of traveling back and forth to Atlanta, where my two young sons, 11 and 10, are. And most recently, we discovered the joys of bike riding and trails. So that's what we've been doing all summer.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Welcome to the show. And next up is Mia Johnson. Hi, Mia.
Hi, Kara.
Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and about what you do here at Ivy Tech?
Sure. My name is Mia Johnson. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the Muncie and Henry County campuses. I've been with the college about 12 years now. Well, I actually started as a student. I'm a proud Ivy Tech graduate, so that started my journey with Ivy Tech. I am a wife, a mother to two sons, Miles and Walker. They're 9 and 11. I'm a leadership educator. I'm a psychology professor, and that's about it.
Excellent. Welcome, Mia. Thank you. And last but not least, Marcus Kolb. Hi, Marcus.
Morning, Kara. I'm Marcus Kolb, Assistant Vice President for Assessment of Student Learning, Academic Quality, and Accreditation. I work in the systems office, have been with the college for about 7 years, live up in Fishers, have 3 daughters, heavily invested in school and all the activities that go along with that. Thanks for inviting me into the conversation today.
Thank you to all of you for joining me. As we start the conversation today, I want to give credit to the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, which publishes a discussion guide entitled Courageous Conversations About Race in Schools. The discussion guide is used as a basis for our questions today as we were thinking about the topic. They just had some really great questions crafted. I'll provide a link to that guide in the show notes as there are additional resources, including some videos and other questions that you might want to check out. And those videos, while they're designed for teachers of younger children, I watched all of them and they still carry really critical and important messages for those of us who educate adults. So I would encourage you to check that out. So with that, we'll start the questions. So the first one, and we're not going to start with easy questions today. They're all hard questions. To what extent do improvements to education depend on us attaining educational equity?
Nobody wants to jump in. All right, I'm going to start because I always start. I struggle with this question. And I think for me, it goes back to, do we want equity? Do we want equality? Do we want justice? When we say equity, we have the danger of looking at, everything the same. And what we know is in our profession, everybody isn't the same. And it's not even based on race. It's the life experiences that we have that they bring to a classroom setting. And when we talk about equity, the only equity that we can hope to attain is that every student walks away with a quality experience. Now, how we achieve that doesn't always look the same for every student. And I would leave that part of the conversation about how we deliver excellent and quality programming to the experts like Mia and Marcus. But, we have to start with that conversation and that vocabulary, because when we say equity, again, people just throw up their hands and say, okay, the room looks the same. We're providing the same tools and equipment. Why is it that we aren't seeing the outcomes that we want? And we know that we aren't. And we can continue to see that, but I'll stop there and give others an opportunity. But I will say that question is difficult because of the word equity for me.
I think I can second Chris's thoughts about the question being difficult, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my head all the way around it. I think, and I know it's a question we'll get into a little bit later, people confuse equity and equality. And especially at a community college where we're open enrollment, people are like, well, it is equitable. There is equality, like anybody can come. And we get stuck on that and not thinking about the other barriers that may be in place for certain students. And I think that's where the conversation about equity comes into play. I think if we go back to even the policy of separate yet equal, like that's air quote, I know you can't see it, air quote equality, but is it? So I think we just got to start having this conversation and understanding the difference between the two words. What's that mean? What does that look like before we can start to move forward?
Yeah, Mia's point there sort of resonates with me as well. What's interesting about this question, as I read it, is it can in some ways remove race from our conversation today. The challenge of equity, particularly at a community college, to me, cuts across our student population, right? It encompasses a lot more than the challenges that our students of color bring or encounter because of the nature of who we are and what we do. Because we have students that are coming from all different places that are under-resourced or lacking in proper preparation or don't have the time that might otherwise be committed to being successful. So while I think it's a great community college conversation, it doesn't drive directly at the question of race in the way that I guess I would want it to. It doesn't call out race well enough for me to kind of talk about it in the context of the college. So educational equity is what we're all about as far as I'm concerned. I've long said community college is the engine for the middle class for our students. It's the way they're going to find their way into the middle class. But so many of our students have so many challenges that are preventing them from finding that way, their way into that middle class. And race is only one of them.
Kara, can you read the question one more time?
Absolutely. To what extent do improvements to education depend on us attaining educational equity?
And see, that's so. I'm gonna stick to the question. It almost it assumes that we want that, and what I mean by that is that everybody wants equity. Everybody doesn't want that. Also, if you frame the conversation about how are we going to fix outcomes by this race conversation, well, yes, that's important, but that's not the only issue. And there's so many ways that this could branch off. Is your concern about equity or is your concern about outcomes? That question might be read differently by different people. I would say, though, to answer the question, I think until we can honestly understand that each one of our students is different, we're not going to reach the outcomes that we want because the way that every student gets there is different. And I keep coming back to that. I use my children as an example. I have one child that's on the spectrum for autism. He's atypical autism is what we call it. It's actually a genetic disorder. He is nonverbal, but he is able to communicate in different ways. My older son is on the gifted end, and he's getting scholarships to go all across the world and do all these amazing things. He became student government president without us even knowing about it because that's who he is. You can't, and even having said that, I have two Black sons, and the statistics will tell you typically that they're going to struggle. Now, they have two active and engaged parents that both have jobs and all those wonderful things, but they are going to struggle. And you can't one size fits all the needs that those two have. It's a very extreme example. But what that question said to me was, we're going to make it equitable. So we're going to give everybody the same treatment. You're not going to get the same outcomes from Mason that you get from Ronald.
And I like that conversation because there's a comic or a picture that's gone around of three people looking over a fence. And they're on different height because one is a child. And so the child needs to be on a really tall box to see over the fence. One is maybe a teenager, needs to be on a little shorter box. And then the adult can just stand and look over the fence. And so that for me has become the definition of equity. Equity is about meeting each person where they are and helping them to then attain the outcomes that we want. But Chris, you're absolutely right. I think this question can be read very differently by different people with different intents.
So, Kara, I know the picture, the drawing that you're talking about, and I think that it is a great start. But if we're going to be honest here today, I think a lot of people can accept it when they're saying we need to give a child a bigger box. But when it's a person of color, a Black person, a fill in the blank person who needs a bigger a taller box, then they're like, wait just 1 minute. I think we're I don't know. We can accept it as a kid. Yes, a kid does not have the same opportunities as an adult. However, when we compare a Black woman to a white woman, their box should be the same. They're both women, they're both adults. And so that's where we get kind of lost in even that graphic that has the ability to show us bigger issues. We kind of want to, it's not really that way.
Yeah, I mean, we could get very deep in the weeds critiquing that picture. And I do like that picture as a way to just describe the basic concept, the difference between equality, everybody gets the same size box, and equity, everybody gets a box that gets them to whatever their goal is, right? But Mia's point to me takes me to, in all cases with the box, the expectation is that you give them the box and they step up on the box, right? And it does not at all account for, hey, maybe some folks have, weights hanging off them that they have to overcome to get up on the box, right? Structural institutional racism, right? Or, think about it in terms of social and economic class, right? They don't have resources, right? So simply providing the box that would get everybody to the same level is not the same as the ability to then following that step up onto the box. And it will be much easier for some of us to do the stepping up than it will be for others. So that diagram really needs more context, more detail, because the varying size boxes are not the end of the equity conversation at all. It's also the ability then to take advantage of those opportunities that we're trying to give folks to help them step up.
Such an excellent conversation. And I think we've actually started to move to the second question. So let's go ahead and go there. In what ways does a dominantly white culture impact your office or campus? And in what ways is that enforced on our students? And I'll start here. We have a couple of people of color who work in our office, and I'm disappointed that that's what we have and that we need to do better work there. And what it gives me is the ability to not have to think about it as a white person, to not have to think about race. And that's part of the problem. That's part of what privilege is. And that's part of the challenge that I think we face in our area, is that we don't have enough voices from other groups being represented in our conversations.
Yeah, that was where I would go to, Kara. It is our sort of our white privilege writ large in those environments where we don't ask questions about race or think about race because it's a room full of people who have never had to ask questions about race or think about race. And so foolishly, our brains never go there, and then we never begin to untangle these other things. So there is an extreme amount of privilege at play there that then trickles down and poisons the entire organization, because for the four of us on this call in leadership roles, at least two of us aren't naturally predestined, or let's say our proclivity isn't to ask about race. And we need to build that into our vocabulary and our conversations if we have any hope of really being useful in these kinds of conversations.
I think what I would add to that is sometimes we get hung up on, I see some Black people, or I see some people of color at my job and in my office. I see them all the time. Well, what positions are they in? If they're all frontline staff, and I'm not saying anything bad about frontline staff. We need people of color spread across, but they need to have a seat and a voice at the table making decisions. Like, we cannot expect an all-white leadership team to make decisions that are in the best interest of our Black students and students of color. That's not how it works. That takes on a whole nother issue that we would have to deal with, this white savior complex. You don't know what's best for me. And I am not the voice. Chris is not the voice for all Black people. However, if there is not a Black voice at the table, I can guarantee you are missing the boat.
And I come from a campus that has a pretty diverse leadership team and has for a number of years. But I can also say, and I say it from the perspective of both me and my experience and for our students, it's exhausting being a person of color in a majority white environment, because that conversation that Marcus just had about never having to really think about race, it is a constant part of my day. And I can choose, because of the privilege that I have and the role that I serve in, I can choose to ignore some things, or I can get by on some of the things that happen and say, well, I'm in this position and I don't have to deal with that. But did they make that comment to me because I'm Black or because I didn't do a good job? Did they make that comment because I'm a Black male, or because, or did they ask me about ways to help other Black people because I'm a Black male and I needed help? Or what do they think of me? And then the next conversation is, well, I have to make sure that I'm absolutely perfect in every conversation because I don't want them to see me as a negative and then negatively impact somebody else getting an opportunity. All of those things happen to me as a senior leader at a campus. So then you boil that down to the people that don't have that access or don't have that privilege, because I'm a person that has had more than one occasion where someone said, I got my job because I was Black. That's happened. And we've worked through it. We've processed through those emotions and those experiences. But imagine being a student in that environment where it's a constant question, where they already feel like they don't belong. Most of our students already struggle with that. And that's not a race issue at all. That's an education issue. Our students don't feel like they belong most of the time. So then being Black and you're the only Black person in the room, or you're one of maybe two, a Black female taking a welding class, a Hispanic female in a pre-nursing program, or any number of those things, those questions are constantly bombarding you, while at the same time you're being told, just tough it out, stick it through, you can do this, you're going to pass this program. And that's just being in the environment of school. We won't talk about any of the external influences that these individuals we're talking about have. So it's a lot of pressure every day, all day, and people get tired. Even when they're trying to have the best of intentions, they get tired and they don't want to deal with it. And I think that that fatigue manifests in different ways for our students.
If it's all right, where Chris began there, I don't think you can oversell the importance of that. And I'll own the fact that, one of my formative experiences in getting interested in social justice and just beginning to awaken to my own privilege is exactly what Chris was talking about. I had a woman of color, a Black woman, tell me about, hey, listen, here's the fundamental difference between you and me, white man. White man, when you're at the airport at the counter and you have a bad interaction with the ticket agent behind the counter, you walk away from that saying, boy, that person's having a bad day, or they're just unpleasant or whatever. Me, Black woman, I have that interaction with that ticket taker, and I can say, yeah, maybe that person's a jerk, or is having a bad day, but I always have to also ask, is it because I'm Black? Did I get that response and that interaction with them because of the color of my skin? Every single interaction I have like that. And, that was probably 25 years ago when she taught me that lesson. And to this day, that's still sort of one of the things I circle back to repeatedly to try and tap into some of, I can't certainly feel what Chris and Mia feel on a daily basis, but when I try, that's the story that I tap into. And as white people, that's the concept we have to grapple with all day, every day, if we have any hope of trying to get in this game and make a difference. It is that kind of daily stress and pressure that Chris described that we just have no frame of reference for as white folks.
Kara, I think Chris brought up an interesting point when he spoke about privilege. And I know that's kind of veering off topic, but I think it's important. We, Chris and I, and some other Black people have privilege. Like, we have some privilege. It isn't white privilege, but we have some privilege that a lot of our students don't have. And that's important. I need everybody to understand privilege and hard work are not mutually exclusive. Like, just because you have white privilege or socioeconomic privilege or educational privilege or whatever doesn't mean you haven't worked hard. Let's get that out of the way. Okay. So I think the exhausting part is knowing I'm coming from this position of privilege. I was raised in a higher socioeconomic status. That started me off. And that's what got me to the place that I am right now, to this, to this leadership privilege or whatever the position that I'm in now. So I feel like I have to take up for and defend our students who haven't yet gotten this privilege that I have. And that's, I think people get lost in, well, look at Chris, he made it. Look at Mia, they're doing good. So everything's equitable. It's all equality around here, when that isn't necessarily true. Yes, I have some privilege, but I am still a Black woman. And so I think that's the exhausting part, constantly trying to make sure people understand just because we look alike and we're both Black doesn't mean that they've had the same opportunities that I've had.
Such good points. And they're reinforced. I'm reading So You Think About So you want to talk about race, which I'll talk a little bit more about at the end of the podcast. And I love the example that the author uses about, people named Oprah and Beyonce and all these people. You don't have to name a white person to identify people who have been successful. And it stopped me as I read it. And Mia, that's such a good point that we've got to remember we all have privilege, and particularly at this level of the institution, we have had some privileges and we've worked hard and all of those things, but our students don't have that. And that's such a really important point. Such a good point. Well, we're going to circle back with the next question to the first question we were talking about and going a little bit deeper into it, hopefully, around how do you distinguish between equity and equality in the classroom setting? Are they the same? Are they different? And how do they relate to the teaching profession, and I'll enlarge that to the educational profession that we're all in?
You guys aren't going to make the student affairs guy jump in first, are you?
I mean, it's okay, Chris, jump in.
I can do it, but I'm not gonna.
Yeah, so I'll give you a 30-second preamble, Chris, and then you go, all right? So this, to me, is sort of this ultimate argument for this trend that we've been talking about happening in education now for 40 years, but isn't really fully actualized, and it's this sense of personalized learning, right? We can do equality because we can bring in a bunch of boxes that are all 6 inches high and give them to the students, and they can step up on them, and they're all getting an equal thing from us, and we're not really worried that with those boxes, can they see over the fence or not, but they all got the box, right? The equality. But the equity piece, where the boxes are different sizes, requires, again, to carry on a good or bad analogy, depending on how you like it, requires that you measure how tall the student is to decide how big the box has to be, right? And every single student will need a slightly different size box to see over the fence, right? And that is the personalized education that we as a field have talked about. And in some ways have gotten a little better with online education and things like that, but it requires the instructor to know the student, to take some time to figure out how tall they are. Do they need a wider box, a smaller box? Do they like a little velvet on their box? Are they happy with just some plywood, right? All of that kind of stuff. So it is that personalization that allows us to get to the equity solutions and not the equality solutions, which would be one size fits all.
I think maybe part of the reason why I struggle with this is because I don't ever want anybody to think that, as an academic officer, I don't want people to think I have to give my Black students a break. I have to not grade them as difficultly as I grade my white students. I don't ever want anybody to think that. I think the best place to start would be acknowledging that, yes, we both graduated from high school, but my experience may not have been equal to the experience that another student had. The teacher may have pulled this other student to the side a few times, like, hey, did you know about student council? Did you know about student government? Did you know about this opportunity to study abroad? The guidance counselors may have worked with those students more. Oh, I know you want to go to Purdue. And, just think about those things and acknowledge them, and acknowledge that not all students are starting off at the same point. That does not mean past Black students, past students of color, give them different assignments. I'm very careful. I never want us to go there. I think just acknowledge we haven't come from the same place. Know that, understand that, and then that's how we start to figure this out.
I agree. And because there's research out there that says, specifically with Black male students, you actually want to try to hold them to a higher standard. Once you've established a relationship with them and they feel like you have an investment in them, you can hold them to a much higher standard than people want to give credit for. It's not about giving breaks. It's not about, finding shortcuts for people. It's about finding the right mix of delivery and support and resource that allows each student to get to the same destination in the end. So for me, equality is rooted in the fact that we are going to provide a quality learning environment and experience for every student. Then we get to equity when we say this student who is receiving the same education needs something else. That doesn't mean that we're making the material doesn't change. You weld the same no matter where you are, okay? But maybe if I adjust the grip that he's holding his welding tools with, maybe he'll perform better. Or maybe if I open up labs and allow all of the students to work together collaboratively, they can learn better from each other. The best in class institutions are those that find a way to solve the issue of everyone not learning the same, but still getting them to the same destination. Because I tell stories, I look at myself, when I am in, you give me the material and then walk away. You know what I mean? Don't try to spoon feed it to me. Just tell me what I need to do and tell me when it's due. I'll do it the night before and it'll be fine. You know, my ex-wife, on the other hand, she's a diligent Ivy Tech student. She starts studying before class starts. She prints out the syllabus and she reads it. And she was deathly afraid every day that she had to go to school. Do you know what I mean? Deathly afraid. She many times operated like a single mom because she had kids to get to and from school, and she had dinners to make. And whenever I showed up after a meeting, I would be there. She had all these external pressures. What she needed from a classroom experience is going to be totally different from what I need. And so again, when we look at this equitable versus, equality, it's going to look different for everybody. And so what we just have to recognize is there is that difference, to Mia's point, based on background and many other factors, but the end goal has to be the same. We just got to figure out how to get everybody there.
The student affairs professional just articulated a beautiful academic answer, Chris. So well done.
I teach from time to time.
You do, yes. How can we view culture, heritage, and race as resources in our profession?
I think the first thing that comes to mind to me on that one is thinking about Black or African American history. There are so many things that I had no idea about. I'll be 40 on Monday, and there's big, huge gaps in my knowledge of Black history here in America. Just think about in college, in most colleges, history is usually required, but African American history is an elective somewhere buried in a department on the edge of campus. The history that we're taught K through 12 is the white history of America. And it's like we're ignoring the contribution that Black people have had to America. We talk about slavery, we talk about Rosa Parks, we talk about Martin Luther King, and maybe throw in a little George Washington Carver, and those are just in February. What about all these other things that we're missing? So it's like from the beginning, we're teaching our kids the history of people that look like you doesn't matter. That's not important. These white people, and particularly white men, are what built this country and made this country what it is. So those are resources that we need to be given to our students. We need to be talking about history and the contributions that people of color to this country from the beginning. How can we bring that into Black authors into our English courses? Like, there's ways to put things in without making it a completely African American studies course. But think about, I think as an instructor, think about the number of things that you're presenting to your students that come from white people and how many are coming from people of color. Little things like that are resources that we can put in and just make everybody feel more welcome. And potentially that helps with equity.
It is, as I see it, incumbent upon us in the classroom to simply create space where we can have the kinds of conversations we're having here, just as the regular course of business, right? I mean, perhaps, and there are a lot of stumbling blocks in our nation around these issues, right? But certainly one of the chief ones right now is our inability to talk about race in a meaningful way. And so both role modeling and then creating a space in the classroom where we can do this and allow people to bring their differences, talk about them and how they have impacted their experience as students at Ivy Tech, growing up, their previous educational experiences that Mia was just alluding to, and creating space for those stories to be told, to me, is the value of bringing those diverse perspectives into the classroom. And so I believe, right, that inviting those voices in, making use of them, making it clear as an instructor that I'm okay if somebody wants to talk about their race or their gender or their sexual orientation and how it has impacted what's gotten them into the room in that moment. And not only do I respect that you want to talk about that, I want you to tell us. I value that. And I believe all of us would grow if we would hear it. And so as an instructor, I'm committed to creating a place where you can do that. That's the real value here, because for me, if they walk out of that room more empowered to have that conversation with others, or more empowered to have that conversation in the next classroom they're in, then we've really started to build the seeds of meaningful change in the culture. That we'll have a whole new generation of people that are having not freshman level conversations, which unfortunately is where we're stuck right now as a culture, but now we're having junior and senior and graduate level conversations about race, gender, et cetera, where real change can happen. That's where it lands for me.
And Mia, as somebody who has a few years of experience on being 40, I shouldn't have learned about something like redlining at 40. And that was when I learned about it. I shouldn't have learned about the contributions of Black scientists and Black females. The movie Hidden Figures changed my entire understanding of NASA and space. And I'm a nerd. Like, I should have known that. That should have been in my culture and my education all the way along. I should have known about those three women, and I didn't. And I even took a women in mathematics course in college, and I didn't learn about them. And that made my experience less valuable, because I could have had a much better understanding of where, as a woman, where I've come from and what work women did in the space race. And so I lost that because we also didn't talk about Black women in that class. And so I think it's valuable, regardless of race, it's valuable to have all the voices represented and all the experiences represented.
So I have to jump in there and just say that, Kara, even with the few years of experience you have over 40 and all of the knowledge that you have, that one movie changed your experience, changed your narrative. Imagine how it would be for a community college student who comes in the door the first time and has never had any exposure to these things. And so when we talk about culture and heritage and their value in the classroom, representation matters. And the more that people can identify with success that others who look similar to them have, the more that you are able to engage them and say, well, if they can do it, so can I. And I think you can't underscore that enough. I'm at the point now where I watch Netflix shows and I get excited every time I see an Asian person. Just like look at television and point out the number of Asians that you see on any show. And I promise you it's less than 5. So I just get excited. It's like, oh, there's an Asian person. You know what I mean? Like, just because I want people to see themselves as they actually are and not as a character, and not because that's how we inspire others to do things. So I think that is a huge, huge, huge statement. And I lost everything else I was going to say. So I'm just going to stop right there.
All right. Well, we'll use that to move to the next question. What support mechanisms do we need in place to recruit, retain, and develop a diverse workforce here at Ivy Tech? And we could have a 60-minute podcast just on this topic, I think, most definitely. But we'll do 5 minutes on it, maybe.
All right, I'm jumping right into this one. This one's mine. No, I say it's less necessarily about, and it's hard for me to even say, it's less about resources and dollars and more about training and preparation for the people that are in front of those students. It doesn't matter what you look like. What matters is that you are able to establish a genuine connection with the students that are working with you so that they feel like you are invested in them. And if they have that feeling, then they can strive. They can push a little bit harder. They can get here despite having to work late or all these other things. It's about the connection. Sure. Will dollars help? Absolutely. You give me $1 million today, I promise I'll have some changes to retention. But you can throw a whole lot of money down a hole if you got the wrong people doing the work.
I definitely second everything you just said. And I think it's about the support that we put in place for our employees of color. The story, and I think, at least I hope, people would cringe if they heard some of the stories that Chris and I have to tell. Some of the daily microaggressions. We don't, except for maybe now, we don't check on our Black employees. Like, I reached out to mine, the few that I had, how are you doing? Are you okay? But like, every day is a struggle. So we need support. They need to know that they're supported by this college, by the leadership in what they're trying to do. Oftentimes we say, well, we can try to recruit from a HBCU. And I cringe at that because we're not ready for that. Our communities aren't ready for that. I would not leave Spelman, surrounded by Black women and Black people to look like me, to come and be in a community that's racist, that doesn't support me, where there's not many people that look like me. It would take a very strong individual to leave at HBCU and come and work at a PWI. It's just not going to happen until we do a better job supporting the employees of color that we have now. We will not be able to recruit and retain anymore.
All right. How can we explore what we do and don't know about equity in the classroom and at the college?
Talk to our students. That's the very first thing. They will tell you any and everything you want to know. If you ask the right question and give them pizza or a t-shirt, they will answer everything. But again, the conversation is going to start with, what do we mean when we ask that question? What are we trying to find out? Because if I walk into a classroom full of students and say, what does equity look like to you? I don't know. If you talk to staff and say, is this an equitable place? Do you feel appreciated? Do you feel like there's opportunity for you? Some may say yes, some may say no. Depends on the day and where you are. And like Mia said, you check on your staff, all of them. As a leader, you check on them all, but there's some questions I can't answer because they're just things that I don't have the power to fix. But if I'm focused on my students, I ask them questions all day long, and the answers that they give me have solved so many problems. So I think you have to start there.
I agree, Chris. I think that's the best place to start. But then we have to be ready to do some action. I think people are tired of talking. I think that's part of what's so exhausting as a Black person. I talk about it and explain, and I tell you, and nothing changes. Like, I'll keep talking as long as changes are happening. Like, I'll never shut up. But when I keep talking and saying the same thing over and over again and nothing changes, that's where the frustration comes. So I would say, don't ask questions if you're not ready to hear the truth, and then work to change the system that has them feeling the way that they're feeling.
I think Mia's point is particularly important now in our culture, our environment, with all of the events here over the last month, and the police violence and the deaths of African-American men and women. And you have now a subset of folks that are like, oh, I had no idea. And on one hand, you got to say, okay. But on the other hand, then I'm very much struck with what Mia said, which is we have a responsibility as white folks. There is plenty that can be learned and done and understood here without having to pepper our friends of color with questions and ask for details and require them to relive these traumas for our own edification as white folks, right? And I think it's a crucial lesson for folks to take away, that if it really matters to you, whether it's mattered to you for years or it's just started to matter for you in the last month, there are abundant resources out there to raise your game and your knowledge around these things. And then you find good people like Mia and Chris who are willing to help as well, but recognize that the work has to start with ourselves. And there is no barrier to that happening. And it doesn't require it being done on the backs of folks that are already experiencing and re-experiencing trauma in our current environment. So, as a call to action, particularly to white people here, it is go find those resources out there where you can start the journey yourself, and then come back with good questions for Mia and Chris. And my bet is they will meet you there at that point, but invest in the work in yourself first.
And that is if you just do a quick Google search, it'll make a conversation go so much smoother. But again, that comes back to something that Mia said earlier. We are far from representation of the experiences of the other people of color that we work with. I would argue that Mia and I, me, I don't want to even speak for Mia. You might get an easy button in a conversation with me if you approach race the right way. You know what I mean? You might. Now, on the wrong day, you won't. But it's not going to be the same experience for everybody. And then I point out here, when we talk about why it's important to have other people in the room, this conversation, as good and as meaty and as meaningful as it is, has largely been a binary conversation about white and Black. But that what we haven't talked about is the experiences of our Latino students, our immigrant students, again, our Asian cultures, all of those folks that have a completely different experience from what we are talking about. And that, to me, is a bigger issue, because those voices get lost in a discussion where we know that there are issues for everyone. And then the problem becomes, oh, well, it's just Black and white people. Black and white people have this issue. Why is it that Black people can't let it go? Why is it white people can't just move on? And there's so many other people that need to be in this dialogue. So when we talk about the representation, the cultural capacity in our classrooms, all those things, there are more things that we have to address that go beyond just, hey, what did you think about this riot last week? You know what I mean? And there's still things that you can Google on your own before you approach these conversations. But just, I feel like that's an important part of the discussion that we have to just kind of touch.
We are focusing today on one aspect of equity, and it's an important one, and it's critical for us to get to continue to pursue this. But Chris, such an important point that you've made too. The last question I have is, how can we rethink the questions we ask during professional development, team collaboration, and other activities so that they encourage professionals around us to look through an equity lens?
There are some basics, I think, that we're lacking as a college around these issues. I think there's some fundamental baseline training, work, preparation that every single faculty and staff member needs to undergo before we can get more deeply into this question, Kara. It is difficult right now to have a meaningful conversation in a room full of people with very mixed experiences and, frankly, philosophies around these issues. And until we land on sort of common understanding and agreement, I don't know that we can get into better professional development and collaboration questions, right? It seems to me we have to start with some foundational stuff. And so I think it would behoove us as an institution to kind of figure out what that is. I know Doran was working towards that as he was finishing his work with us. I know Denisha has her eye on that now. I think that's crucial. It does two things. It gives us language where we can have an easier and better conversation because we're in agreement in what we're talking about. And frankly, it also separates the wheat from the chaff a little bit. And when I say that, I mean, we have to take a stand as an institution that might say to some of our faculty and staff, this isn't going to be a good place for you because you're not going to come along with us in what we feel like is important work. And so maybe you need to reconsider whether or not Ivy Tech's the right place for you, because as a college, we're moving this way and it doesn't feel like you're ready to do that. So I think that common language and that baseline training also helps us get into those where folks say, yeah, I don't know, it doesn't matter to me, whatever. Okay, well, maybe this isn't the right place for you. Once we do that, then I think we can get more deeply into, in the case of an instructor, how do we talk about an equitable pedagogy, right? In the case of a staff member, how do we talk about engaging students that come to you with different needs and backgrounds? But I believe firmly in the foundational first, and I think we would benefit greatly from starting there.
Chris, I want to make sure we get your point in, which was to bring more people into the conversation, right?
Yeah, so much of this leadership development and like the value in those experiences is hearing from other people and knowing their journey and how servant leadership means one thing to someone else, and change management, what does that look like, and how your perspective and background have led you to where you are. Learning about Mia's background and being an Ivy Tech student and how she is now Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs. Like, there's a lot of good lessons in there for somebody. And if we're all having a conversation about leadership and we're all having a conversation about equity and all these other things, how many light bulbs go off hearing Mia's story or hearing Marcus's story? Marcus led our college through a reaccreditation visit. That is insane. When we talk about what we need to do with professional development, you just got to get more people in the room. So often we focus on the people that raise their hand, and maybe they want to do the work, and maybe they just want to raise their hand. But there are a whole bunch of other people that don't step up because they don't feel like they're adequate, or they don't feel like they have anything of value to say. So the more we can include and invite more voices into that conversation that don't look like us or don't have the same background as us, the more deeply and more richly we can explore different topics and have better learning outcomes.
I think that was the perfect, alley-oop, some basketball term. My husband always used basketball words. That was the perfect, he passed me the ball. I think getting more people in the room. But I think we have to be willing to listen. And I think that's beyond racism and race and these issues. Like, that's one of the hardest things for people to do. We're so quick to want to defend our position or our stance or what we've said or what we've done that we don't even hear what the person is saying. If someone says to you, that was racist, that doesn't make you a bad person. You don't have to defend. I didn't mean to be racist. That's not what we're saying. I'm saying that's what I took it as. That's what it felt like. It doesn't mean you meant to. It doesn't mean that was your goal. It doesn't mean any of that. It doesn't change the way that I think about you or feel about you. But when you don't listen and you know it's not, I didn't, that's when I start thinking certain things. Like, we have to be willing to hear what people are saying to us and not just race sexism. If a man or somebody says something and someone says, that felt sexist, take it. Listen for a second. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to why it made them feel the way they felt. Listen to all of those things and take them in before you open your mouth.
And that is a perfect way to bring our conversation to a close, because that's what we invited folks to do today, was to listen and to sit with any discomfort you might have felt and not try to defend it, but just to try to grow as a result of it. So to my guests, I want to thank you. I'll do that formally here in a second, but we do end every episode with a call to action. Obviously, we did already ask you to listen and to sit with any discomfort you might have and reflect on how you might grow as a result of it. I invite you to do that again and to re-listen to this episode if you weren't quite there yet. This episode will stay in your queue and you can go back and listen again, because I know as I'm focusing on recording, I didn't take all of the elements out of it. So I know as I listen each time, I'm going to get more and more out of the conversation. The second call to action, the one that I alluded to at the beginning of the episode, is that we want to continue this conversation through a podcast book read of the book So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. I will be sharing information on how to join this book read as an active part of the discussion in this afternoon's All College email. For now, if you do not yet have this book, if you'd like to join the conversation, either as a part of the podcast or just simply to read and consider along with us, please purchase a copy of the book. I'll put a direct link to buy the book in the show notes for today. I want to thank everybody who tuned in and listened to this episode of Our College, Our Voices. And I want to especially thank the members of today's panel, Chris Cathcart, Mia Johnson, and Marcus Kolb. Thank you to each of you. It was a great conversation, and I'm so blessed to have each of you as my colleagues. So thank you. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. You can connect with me on Twitter at KNMTweets. You can reach us by email at ourcollegeyourvoices@ivytech.edu. Leave us a voicemail at 317-572-5049. If you're an Ivy Tech faculty or staff member, you can join our Microsoft Teams listener community. Our website is ivytech.edu/podcast. Production assistance for this and every episode provided by Becky Campbell, Sarah Ferguson, and the Ivy Tech Community College marketing team, and our podcast concepts by Matthew Pittman. Theme music and post-production services provided by Jen Eads at the Brassy Broadcasting Company. We will talk to you next time on Our College, Your Voices.